everyone, Cleo here and welcome to my channel, and today I will be wrapping up the month of March, and ain't I happy to see it go. So the month of March has been treating most of us unkindly, but in terms of the amount of books that I read, March is actually quite okay. I read as many books as I read in the month of February. Page-wise I read a little bit less, but in the month of February I really just read a whole lot of pages for me, so I'm very happy with how my month ended up. So I will be doing the same as I did last month, so I will be going through the books that I finished in the month of March and the books that I purchased in the month, giving you an update on the amount of unread books on my shelves at the end of this month. So I will be going through the ones that I read first. Mind you, there are 3 books that I will just be mentioning now, but I won't be giving my thoughts on them because I'll do a separate video for that. Those 3 books are part of the books that I had to read for round 1 of the BookTube prize. So the books that I read this month for the BookTube prize were Frankenstein by Jeanette Winterson, Inland by Thea Obrecht, and Where Reasons End by Yi-Yoon Lee. So apart from those, let's dive into the books that I read in the month of March. As I had to read Frankenstein by Jeanette Winterson, I took this opportunity to reread a book that I've been wanting to reread for a very long time, and that is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Everybody kind of knows this story, but if you've never read the book then you try to pick it up, then you will see that it's actually quite different than the story that you imagine it to be. But basically this is a story about Victor Frankenstein, who is a brilliant student who, when he is young, he kind of reads these books about these alchemists who are trying to like find the philosopher's stone, find eternal life and things like that, and he is very much fascinated by them, by all that they are exploring. But then he gets disillusioned when it turns out that people have long discredited the theories of these people. He dives into his work and he tries to find out new scientific discoveries, and throughout this process at some point he creates the monster. And the book is very much more about the aftermath of this creation than the creation itself. The creation itself you can just read over. I had to reread it because at some point I was like, wait, what? The monster's already there? Wait, how does this happen? So there's no like vivid description of it the way you have that scene in the movie, for example. So that was really a little bit like, that could have been elaborated on a little bit better. Although I do also feel that because she doesn't explore the way that the monster is made, it also makes it a lot more believable, because that way it's not something that like modern science can contradict, because you're not entirely sure how it was made, how it happens. But so the book focuses a lot more on Frankenstein's sort of like descent afterwards, of him seeing the monster, rejecting the monster, and like the fears and tribulations that he has to go through afterwards, in fearing for the safety of his loved ones, fearing for humanity, dreading what he has done, dreading the monster that he has created, as well as about the monster itself, and the monster trying to find its place in this world where he is alone, where nobody understands him and everybody is repulsed by him. Even his own creator has openly rejected him in his life. And so I think it was a very interesting look at like creation, at how far should science be going, how much how much power of creation are we allowed to use, you know, how much is too much. When we start playing God, what can the consequences be? So I thought it was very good at its like exploration of the feelings of Victor Frankenstein after the creation of the monster. It went very deep into despair, despondency, depression, and looking at like the feeling of guilt and not feeling like you can share that feeling with anybody. I thought that those were the most interesting passages. There's this whole part of the book which is the monster story, and a lot of people have problems with that one, and I definitely understand why, because so like while I feel like it's very interesting to look at the way that the monster is learning about humanity, learning about feelings, learning about everything that is part of human life, I do think it drags on for too long, and it is told in a very sort of like boring way, so that it really drags in that part, and that's definitely part of the reason why I rated it down, because at parts it definitely feels like a struggle to get through this. Next book I want to talk about is part of the micro challenge. So I usually set myself a micro challenge every month. In the month of March this was to read books published in 2019. I have set aside 3 books for this. I only read 1. But in all fairness, 5 out of the 10 books that I read this month were published in 2019. So in a way I did still finish the micro challenge. But so the book that I read that was specifically meant for that challenge is Lost Children Archive by Valeria Luiselli. This also fits in nicely with my semi-goal of finishing the long list for the Booker Prize. I definitely want to finish the short list, but the long list would be nice as well, and this book didn't make it onto the short list. Though at this point, I still need to read 5 books in total, but at this point it would make my shortlist. I definitely really enjoyed this one and would highly encourage you guys to read it. I didn't think it like elevated itself to the 5-star rating, that's why I keep it as a 4-star, but I definitely think it was a very interesting read and an enjoyable read as well. And it looked at some, it had like this interesting aspect at its center. So both of the parents that we are following in this book are sound documenters, so they collect sounds from all around them and they try to make sound documentaries with it, for example. And so that kind of went in the background of everything, you know, they're constantly like taking memories in the form of sound, for example, which I thought was very interesting. They're also constantly talking about documenting and archiving and things like this. And so in a way this book is very much a book about storytelling as well, about the documenting, the archiving of memories, the forming into a coherent story, and the way we pass down these stories to the next generation. I very much liked this. I liked how it interwove different stories. So we are getting, as a main story, we are following a newly composed family of like 2 adults who met each other at a later date, who both already had a child, and so now we have this newly composed family. They are moving down towards Arizona. They don't yet really know what their final destination will be. They might move there, it's unclear, because both of their parents have like different projects in mind, and so maybe they will actually grow apart at the end of this book. And they are moving down there for sound documenting. So they have 2 different projects, but both of their projects are looking at like the people who kind of fall outside of regular society. So the father is looking at the last of the Apaches. He really wants to document everything that he can still find about the Apaches and make a documentary on them. And the mother is looking at the more current situations in which children are crossing over the border with Mexico into the US, and if they are from Mexican descent, then they are immediately returned back to their home country. And so she's trying to gather testimonials of people who have been involved in this situation. And so this is our main story, but we are also looking at a story within a story, which is a story about refugee children who are making the journey into or towards hopefully a better world. And these stories are not separate stories, as usually is not the case, of course, within a story within a story. It seems to be the case because the story within a story is a story from a book that she's telling, but it interweaves at a certain point in a very interesting way into the reality of this story. I thought it was a very interesting look at the refugee crisis as well, so it's very much looking at it from an outside, from a distant perspective. We kind of get this feeling of this outside perspective of somebody looking on and trying to follow the developments the way that we would follow the developments of the refugee crisis on TV, on the news, in the newspapers. And so I definitely liked this sort of aspect to it, the way that this refugee crisis was tackled without really having very much of a personal story about refugees. So I thought it was a very interesting take on the refugee story, very much showing it the way that we are exposed to this sort of story already. I also think that Valeria Luiselli has a very interesting narrative style, so she's very much able to kind of transform a scene, to put you in that scene by not just describing what is happening, but very painting a very vivid portrayal of the feelings associated with that moment, with that place. So it really made you move into the story in that sense. So I really couldn't recommend this more. I really love this. Next up, I'll talk about the shortest one on here for a bit, because otherwise I'm going to be going too long. Next up is Grief is a Thing with Feathers by Max Porter. Sadly, this was a little bit of a letdown for me, because Lemony by Max Porter I read in 2019 was my favorite book of the year last year, and so I wanted to read his other work, Grief is a Thing with Feathers, but this was not that much for me. So it's very experimental, it's very much more like in the line of like poetry or stuff like that. You have like very short pages with like a lot of paragraphs. It's told through like 3 different perspectives: the perspective of the boys, the father, and the crow. So at the beginning of this book, they lose the mother figure in their family, and so it's about the process of grief and the way that they deal with this. And throughout their dealing with grief, they are visited by the being of the crow, who is kind of there, and he's going to stick around until they no longer need him. So it's very weird. It's told in a different narrative style, and I must say that a lot of it went over my head. I have heard that there's a lot of references to the poetry of a certain writer, and I've forgotten Ted Hughes. So there's a lot of references to the writing of Ted Hughes, and I've heard that if you read Ted Hughes' The Crow, or his Crow poems or something like that, then you also get a whole lot more out of this book. I wasn't intrigued enough to feel like I'm going to be redoing that, but I would definitely say that if you haven't read Lemony, read Lemony. But so yeah, I will definitely still be on the lookout for more stuff by Max Porter. Sadly, this one was a little bit more of a miss for me. Next up, I read 2 books in a series of unfortunate events. So I read the 6th one, the Ersatz Elevator, and the 7th one, the Vile Village, and I definitely enjoyed these ones a lot. So I have been going through them since the month of January. So I read the first 4 in January, the 5th one in February, and so the 6th and 7th one in this month. So I had been saying at the beginning that I didn't want to continue if they were going to be very formulaic as they were in the very beginning, but with the 6th and 7th one this definitely wasn't the case anymore. So they've definitely been like switching things up, been like changing the formula around a little bit, or like really working like people's expectation based on the formula and then throwing like a sort of curveball your way. The 6th one I definitely enjoyed the most out of these 2. Like the 6th one was very much focused on like giving commentary on like trend setting and on people following trends. So they are left into the care of 2 guardians, and for once you think like, they're finally in the care of like good guardians again, because like the father figure is very much interested in them, he's very much loving, he's very much giving them whatever they want. The mother figure at first you think is kind of annoying, because she's always looking at like trendy stuff and like buying the stuff that is on brand at the moment. But throughout you kind of figure out that they once again haven't landed in the best of situations, because while the behavior of their mother figure is less than desirable, the biggest problem is the fact that the father figure is not there to stand up against her and to kind of push back and tell like, it doesn't matter that this or that isn't in brand, if the kids want it, then let's just get it for them. So throughout this book is very much looking at different ways in which people can be bad guardians. So this guardian might be loving and all that, but if he isn't willing to stand up for these children, then he's still a bad guardian. I like the 6th one a lot. The 7th one is actually doing an interesting thing where it's also, at first you think like this guardian figure is very much similar to the guardian of the previous story, but then it turns that expectation around again, which is what I very much like about these later books. We are getting closer to like the whole mystery of VMD, but like it's still, that's the one thing that's kind of annoying me, is the fact that we're dragging it out a lot. So it first got mentioned at the end of book 5, and then in book 6 we're constantly trying to figure it out. Book 7 we're trying to figure it out. so I definitely feel like book 8 needs to tell me what VMD is, or I'm going to get like very annoyed at the fact that this is constantly there in the background, constantly being used as a sort of like pull, like, oh, what possibly could this be? Let's keep on reading until we find out. I need to find out for now, or otherwise I'm gonna get annoyed with this book a little bit. Next up is a book that I do not own physically, and that is the Andromeda Strain by Michael Crichton. So this is a pandemic book, if you want to call it. It's not a pandemic book, it's an epidemic book. And this was kind of a letdown, sadly. So at the beginning, when this whole corona crisis situation was getting a lot more serious, I felt a very big urge to read a book about an epidemic or something like that, about a severe outbreak of some sort of illness. I didn't want to read about any that like had really taken place, so I didn't want to read about like the plague or cholera or anything like that. I wanted to read like a sort of sci-fi thriller set with this involving this sort of thematic elements. A lot of people definitely don't understand. A lot of people definitely want to escape this as much as they can, and I can definitely understand that. I think that just my mind needed sort of to see what had been done with that in a sort of fictional setting, to see how people have coped with that in a fictional setting, the way that this whole thing played out in a fictional setting. I know that that can definitely be a dangerous route to take, because yeah, if your book is going to end with the total destruction of all humanity, it's definitely not going to be very uplifting. In the case of the Andromeda Strain, I think you're pretty safe, but I definitely wouldn't recommend the book. Not for the reason, not because of Corona, but just because I didn't really like the book at all. So I really love Michael Crichton and his story writing. I love Jurassic Park, one of my favorite books of all times. But I have read different books by him. Some of them I have liked, some of them I've not gone along with as well. I mean, I've never disliked ones, but there have been a lot that I've been kind of indifferent to, and I feel the same about the Andromeda Strain. But it is apparently also one of the first books that he published, so it's quite understandable that he was still kind of fine-tuning his craft, basically. So the problem with the Andromeda Strain is actually just that it's too scientific. It's too much looking at the science behind this virus, and it's maybe not even a virus, I think, and then looking at technology and things like that, very much exploring the whole science behind the concept and not really going into a thrilling story or anything like that. It's also told in a very scientific way. It's very much more as if it's like, as if we're documenting what is happening for just for documenting purposes, and so that reads very slowly because it doesn't really thrill you. It doesn't give you a personal connection with the characters or anything like that. So in the Andromeda Strain, the idea is actually basically that a probe has returned from outer space and it carried some bacteria with it that haven't died when they re-entered Earth's atmosphere. And at the time when the military is kind of reclaiming that probe, the entire village is dead. I thought it was interesting, but as I said before, we're very much more looking at this whole idea of having a sort of task force set up to deal with the situation, and about the sort of like secret laboratory that they've explored, but there's not very much thrilling in the way of the developments with that disease, and the ending is very anticlimactic. Let's hope that coronavirus has the same sort of anticlimactic ending that this book has, because it really was anticlimactic. So in the end, it satisfied my urge afterwards. I didn't feel the need anymore to read anything epidemic centered or anything like that, but it definitely also didn't really satisfy my want for good storytelling. So final one that I'm going to be telling you guys about is Faith of the Fallen by Kade. So this was published in 2019 as well. I wasn't initially going to buy it immediately, just because I very much love another series by this author, King's Dark Tidings, which is not physically available. And I was kind of disappointed to see a new series come out rather than to see the continuation for that series. But in the end I caved. I decided on a whim that I wanted to buy it, got it in the mail, immediately started reading. This is also a book that I acquired in the month of March, and I'm very happy with the fact that I did, because I really did enjoy this a lot. So what I like a lot about Kade's writing is that the protagonists in these stories are always sort of like the reluctant hero character. So it's always a sort of hero who kind of stumbles into herodom, let's call it like that, and they're always like accumulating people around them. They seem to like not want to accumulate people, but they have this sort of like inner charisma, inner charm that other people are drawn to, and it's people from all ranks as well. You know, it's the small urchins on the street who are struggling to make a living, it's the dukes and the duchesses, everybody in all ranks of the kingdom, they are drawn to these hero characters. So this is happening in King's Dark Tiding as well as in this book. So in this book we are following the Chosen One story. So we have a Chosen One story, which I know it's a trope that has been done a lot of times, but this one turns it around. So this one is actually looking at what to do if the Chosen One fails. Basically what to do if Frodo were to die and Sam has to take up his quest. So it's very much looking at a hero having to take on the mantle of responsibility against his wishes. It's not like he's being forced to, but he feels like he's the only one who is like nobody else is going to do it, so it has to be him. He is accumulating people throughout, and it's very much looking at interesting concepts as well, because we have reapers in this story, which I don't necessarily see all that often in fantasy stories. Definitely not in like stories that mix other traditional fantasy elements in with them. So these reapers can kind of like release their breath and then they step into the world of the gods. So it's also very much looking at like gods. So it's very much also looking at this sort of like play for power within the world of the gods, and the way that gods are just meddling with these people's life without understanding or caring about the impacts. Very much this book is also reflecting on the art of prophecy and the way that prophecy has an impact on the story, and yeah, I really liked it a lot. What I will say, you might find this annoying, so if you're somebody who does not like this, then definitely beware. This has a lot of easy resolutions, so this story moves along very fast. It's not like we are faced with a problem and then the entire book is spent trying to figure out the solution to that problem. Solutions will kind of magically appear throughout, but they will lead into more problems and stuff like that. So the story is constantly revolving and moving on. So where you might think at first, for example, that this is a story about this person going to that place to fulfill that part one, and you think like that will be the entire book, it will turn out that there are like 5 other quests that will take place throughout this book. So I can understand that that's kind of annoying. In certain books I definitely also find it annoying when like answers are easily presenting themselves, but I feel like here they are always easily presenting themselves in a way, so it's very much a chain of events, and that just makes it feel like it just has a different flow to it. But once you accept that flow, it's also nice to have a story move along that fast and to see like what crazy resolutions are like making their way into the story. In that way it's a little bit more like Princess Bride, for example. It's a little bit more of a comic fantasy than it is like a serious epic fantasy or anything like that. But I definitely enjoyed it a lot, definitely will be continuing, but I definitely also hope for another book in the King's Dark Tidings series, and if you haven't read them, read them, they're great. So this is the final book that I am going to be talking to you guys about. So I did also read 3 other books in the month of March that I told you guys about in the beginning. And then it's up for me to talk about the books that I acquired in the month of March. And as for the books that I read in the month of March, I'm actually not going to talk about all of them. So there are 3 books that I acquired that I won't be mentioning since they're part of the secret projects. Then I also acquired, as I briefly mentioned in my discussion of it, Fate of the Fallen by Kade. Another book that I acquired is Invisible Women, Exposing Data Bias in a World Designed for Men by Let's try to pronounce this Englishly. by Caroline Criado Perez. This is a non-fiction book that I am going to read in the month of April because there is a book, like a read-along being hosted before this. And this is a book that is mainly looking at the way that looking at data, looking at statistics might be harmful to females, because if you're looking at just the average results, then you're not looking at the way in which the female reality might be very different from the male reality. For example, if you look at crash test dummies, they are tested in the shape of a male, but the female anatomy might have very big impact on the results that you're getting on these crash tests, and this is something that's not looked at. For example, also like the heating in offices is often set to a temperature that males find comfortable, but for females it often needs to be a little bit warmer, for example. So it's very much looking at the way that the data for women is being like disregarded or is being badly influenced by looking at averages. Next up, I just had to buy the Obelisk Gate by N.K. Jemisin, so I finished the 5th gate in February. I did not manage to get this one done in March. Don't know whether it will happen in April, but I definitely want to read this fast, so might have to try and squeeze it in. So this is the sequel to the 5th season, which is a fantasy series by N.K. Jemisin, which is set on a sort of like Broken Earth. It's called the Broken Earth trilogy, in which Earth has kind of taken revenge for everything that humanity has done against it, and there are these people who do have powers to control Earth, but they're very much looked down on, and they're very much like people don't really trust them, don't really trust that they have the best intentions. They're also dangerous if not controlled properly, so it's very much looking at that type of world. It was wonderful, I really enjoyed it a lot, so I want to continue. Next, I also bought Actress by Anne Enright, which made it onto the long list for the Women's Prize for this year. This is a book about a young girl who is kind of telling the story about her mother and what fame does to her, I think. It is a gorgeous cover and I really am looking forward to reading this book. And then the final one that I acquired is Weather by Jenny Offal, gorgeous cover. This is a book, as far as I'm aware, about this woman who's kind of working in the library, and she gets a lot of questions about all sorts of topics and she's trying to find the answers, but it's supposed to be a book mostly about climate change, and I hear a lot of people say that you're not going to be very positive about climate change after reading this one. It's a very short one. I am hoping to be able to squeeze it into April. I didn't put it on my pile of possibilities, but I'm hopeful that I'll get around to it. But so that means that in the month of March I physically reduced my unread books, the amount of unread books by, this book does not need to be there, by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 books, but I acquired 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 books. So I have 3 extra unread books at the end of this month versus at the beginning of this month. So at the end of this month I am down to, well, I'm up 136 unread books. So hopefully next month I will be able to go down again, hopefully even down further than I was at the beginning of this month, but I definitely do feel like it would have been okay, it would have been in check if it weren't for the fact that I had a secret project for which I had to buy certain books. But so yeah, those are intended to be read very fast in any case, because I do want to get that secret video out pretty soon. So hopefully by the end of next month I will have at least read the ones that I acquired this month. Some others are still on their way and definitely will be ordering more for that as well. So yeah, this is not statistically wise the perfect way to go, but in all honesty, it would have been a bit delusional of me to think that I was only going to go down for the entire year. So hopefully I'll just be able to keep it at going down the majority of the times, and hopefully limiting the months in which I'm upping the amount of unread books on my shelves. But so yeah, I'm pretty happy with this. So 10 books read in all, 2 still on the way, and yeah, quite a lot of new books, but hey, I'm excited about all of them, and hopefully we'll be able to prioritize most of these soon. So let me know down below if you've read any of these books, what your thoughts were on them, and then definitely let me know if any of the books, for example, that I just purchased are on your wish list or anything like that. If you want to talk about the books that I've discussed, let me know down below, and we can chat about them in the comments. So see you guys for the next one. Bye!